These homesteading mistakes could be costing you valuable time, energy, and even money. And as a fellow homesteader myself, I know that we don't have a lot of that to spare. So let's talk about some of the homestead mistakes that I made, some of the things that we would do over if we were starting our homestead from the beginning. Hopefully this can save you guys from making some mistakes on your own. So let's get started. One of the first mistakes that we made was focusing mainly on chickens and not thinking much about other livestock. It seems the chickens are kind of the gateway into homesteading. Obviously, they're incredibly easy to take care of with just a few minutes each day. And honestly, if you've got something like this chicken tractor behind us, it's pretty cost effective as well. When we added pigs to our homestead at the end of last year, I regretted not adding them sooner so much. Pigs are incredibly easy. If you've watched this channel or been around on social media for any length of time, you know that I really enjoy them. Even though they're strong, even though they make a mess at times, their setup costed around the same as it did to get started with chickens. And we're going to get so many more cuts of meat than you would from raising just a meat chicken or even just eggs from your backyard egg-laying chickens. So not starting with pigs sooner is something I really regret. Now, another mistake that I wanted to mention is not necessarily something that we did on our homestead, but it's something that I see a lot of people doing, and that is to wait to do meat chickens. If you can raise egg-laying chickens, and honestly, even if you never have, a chicken is a chicken. So if you've been doing really well with egg-laying chickens and are wondering if you should add meat birds, the answer is yes. Go ahead and get started now. And one more thing on this note of egg-laying chickens, meat chickens, I asked on our Facebook community some things that people would have done differently on their homesteads. And one of the things that I saw that was really interesting was someone was saying that they would have started with ducks and just left chickens altogether. But then I also saw a couple of comments with people saying they would have done either ducks or chickens, that doing the two together was just too much hassle and they would have picked one to start with. So that's just a little food for thought there.
Next mistake that we made on our homestead was prioritizing the garden over livestock because we thought that it would be cheaper. And I want you to hang with me because it can be cheaper to start a garden instead of having livestock. This is something that has a really quick turnaround and it's an incredible skill to learn. And I just talked about gardening in my last video, so I'm not trying to persuade you that you shouldn't be gardening, but prioritizing a garden over adding animals to your homestead because you feel like it's going to save you money on your grocery bill might not be the right play. Because to be honest, if you're thinking about what is the most expensive at the grocery store and what you're probably eating the most of, it's probably meat. So we have found that even on our small 2-acre homestead, raising animals to supplement our grocery bill is way more cost effective than growing veggies. So that's not to say that we don't grow vegetables and fruits, because we do. But to go kind of along with that first point, we should have started some other animals like meat rabbits and pigs way sooner if we actually wanted to save a little bit of money, become a little bit more sustainable. We should have done that sooner. When it comes to gardening, there is a mistake that I made and I kind of continue to make it. It's something that I'm working on, and that is not putting enough focus on creating organic material for the garden, collecting it, creating it via compost, not doing that enough. I think as a new gardener, it was so much easier to see a problem in the garden and treat it, whether that was with diluted urine or maybe even a fish emulsion or something like that. I see a pest and I spray for it. But now a couple years in, I'm realizing that not building that organic material in my soil, not spending enough time feeding the soil and instead focusing on treating plant symptoms has left even more problems. So to learn from my mistake, focusing on creating compost, adding organic material to your beds as many days a week as possible is so important. When you're thinking about your gardening tasks, it shouldn't be an afterthought to think of adding these coffee filters to the compost or these food scraps to the compost or picking up the manure from the yard and adding it to your compost pile or whatever. These should not be afterthoughts. These are so incredibly important as far as gardening goes, and they should be a priority right there along with planting your seeds. If you have watched any of these videos on homesteading mistakes and what people wish that they would have done sooner or what they wish that they wouldn't have done, chances are you've heard something about fencing. And this was echoed on my Facebook community as well, because this was mentioned time and time again, starting with improper fencing or not thinking fencing through or weak fencing. There's a whole lot of things we could talk about in this topic, but the mistake that we made was not starting with the fencing that we wanted to end with. So when we decided to fence off an area for our free range egg-laying chickens, first they were just all over the property, you know, pooping on the porch, the whole thing. And so when we decided to fence them off, we decided to go with just a like rubber netting, and it worked for a while, but then it caused more problems than it was worth. The dog could get under to go chase cars, which made a hole, so then the chickens were out. And we even tried to limp along with this by buying more and doing it again. And I will say that it did serve its purpose for a time with the budget that we had. But if you can just wait a little bit longer, budget out some fencing that you actually think will work, that you actually want to end with, this can save you a lot of time and a lot of stress. If you've got an animal that's getting into places that you don't want them to be or they shouldn't be, it is a whole hassle, especially if that might be your perimeter fence and they're getting into the neighbor's yard or something like that. So this is a big one. And if you are thinking of bringing a new animal onto your property, the number one thing you should do before you do that is to get all of their infrastructure set up. Do not bring an animal onto the property if you don't have the fencing set up, their housing set up. So there's just a little bonus tip. Just make sure that their infrastructure is all set up so you can enjoy learning how to raise that animal and not be dealing with all the pitfalls of not having your fencing and your setup done correctly. The next one is one that we have been actively working on remedying this year, and that is that we did not plant enough fruit trees and perennials early on. So we didn't take the time and a little bit of money that was necessary to get some fruit trees in. And what that led to was me being pregnant with our fourth son, having that baby, and being completely burnt out when it came to the garden. Because when you're dealing with annuals, you are constantly sowing and growing and harvesting and repeating. And there is no break from that like there would be with something like a blueberry bush or a perennial flower. You're not doing the constant replanting like you are with an annual garden. So not only do we have to wait for these things to be of a good age to get a good harvest, but also we had a lot of seasons in our annual vegetable garden where I was dealing with having babies and raising those babies, which is a huge blessing, but I wasn't able to give the garden the time that it needed. So we were dealing with subpar harvests, which may not have been the case if we had more perennials and fruit trees in. And this was echoed on our homesteading community. Many people were talking about fruit trees, perennials, asparagus, things like that you can spend a little bit of hard work and time planting those things now and be reaping the benefits of that for years to come with not a lot of extra work. So this is something that we're still actively working on, but I know everybody says it really is true. Start thinking about those perennials first, or at least alongside your first annual garden if you can. Get those in as soon as you can so you can reap those benefits and you're not working as hard as often. Another mistake that we made, and this is going to sound kind of weird and it might be a little controversial, but we focused way too much on being as sustainable as possible when we started our homestead. So we started with a bunch of egg-laying chickens, and the breeds that we bought were breeds that tend to go broody, were a little larger, so they'd be great for incubating their eggs and raising some dual purpose meat birds. And we did this for a couple years and it was fantastic. But this led us to wait quite a bit of time before trying out an actual meat bird breed like the Cornish cross. And because we are a family of 6, a dual purpose heritage meat bird that we're raising from the eggs from our egg layers, it is not a lot of meat. And so focusing on sustainability and keeping that closed system and doing everything on our homestead, it led us to be getting maybe a meal out of these chickens and being very frustrated for the 16 weeks it was taking to raise them and the fact that you had to work really hard to get a full meal out of these chickens. So what have we done differently now? We focus on what is the best decision for our small homestead. I think that is so important to remember, is that we are only on about 2 acres here. So while there might be better solutions like pasturing pigs or maybe having the space and the time to have different coops to breed the perfect meat bird for your homestead, that is just not something that we can do. And I see a lot of different comments when it comes to our pig pen, which is right in front of me, and people saying, oh, that's not sustainable, you should be doing pastured pigs. That's so so much better. But I think we focus too much on doing things perfectly and doing things the most sustainable, regenerative way that we possibly could, that we made it harder on ourselves and we weren't picking animals that were actually right for the property that we have. So for us, raising a Cornish cross, getting those birds shipped in from a hatchery is what's best for us. These birds can feed our family for about 2 meals. They only take 8 weeks to grow, which is perfect for the busy parents of young kids that we are and our small homestead. Now, what do we do to make sure that in case we can't get those birds, we can still have chickens for meat? We always keep an incubator, and we often are doing a couple rounds of incubated chickens every year to add to our egg-laying flock. So buying chickens from a hatchery for our meat birds when we can is fantastic. And if there ever came a time when we couldn't, well, we've got the more sustainable option right there of hens that like to go broody and an incubator in case none are doing that. And the same goes for the pigs. It would be fantastic to have pigs that run solely on pasture, but that's just not what we can do right now, so we're doing what we can. But if you're focusing so much on being sustainable and doing things the perfect way the first time, you might miss out on some options that are really great for you and kind of meeting in the middle, like what I'm talking about with our meat birds and having an incubator. I also wanted to mention that when I asked our Facebook community what is something that you wish you would have done differently when starting your homestead from scratch, someone said something that I thought was really great, actually a couple people, and that was that they wish they would have started earlier. So you're watching these videos on mistakes you want to make sure not to make or things you want to make sure to do, and it can kind of create some analysis paralysis and maybe have you thinking that you can't get started right now because you don't have the perfect setup or you've got all these things you need to think about. When one of the things that people are wishing that they would have done is start earlier, because at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know, and you can't learn some of these things unless you are in it and dealing with it and figuring out the solutions to those problems as you go. I hope that this video has been helpful for you and encouraged you on some things that maybe you should do or not do on your homestead when you're starting. But at the end of the day, I think that you should just start. Just try something and get started and learn as you go. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and like, comment, let me know what you've got going on your homestead this year. And if you did like this video, I'm gonna leave up the video we did last week on some really easy gardening tips. Every gardening tip I could think of off the top of my head from a lazy gardener so that you can garden without it being a ton of stress. I hope that you guys are having a great day, and I will see you in the next video.